Erdogan Blackmails NATO Allies by Mike Whitney for Counterpunch on Information Clearinghouse, December 4, 2015. You know the country has really gone to the dogs when Washington's main allies in its war on Syria are the two biggest terrorist incubators on the planet. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and Turkey, both of which are run by fanatical Islamic zealots devoted to spreading violent jihad to the four corners of the earth. Not that the U.S. doesn't have blood on its hands too. It does, but that's beside the point. The point is that if you're trying to sell your fake war on terror to the public, then you might want to think twice about lining up with Grand Sultan Erdogan and King Chop Chop of Riyadh. The optics alone should have sent the White House PR team running for cover. I mean, couldn't they have hired squeaky clean Iceland to join the fray, just to persuade the public that the ongoing proxy war wasn't a complete sham? Which it is. It all goes to show that no one in the administration really gives a rip about appearances anymore. Obama is going to do what he wants to do, and if you don't like it, tough. Isn't that the message? Of course it is. But just look how that apathy transfers itself into other areas of governing, like, let's say, strategic planning. Take Syria, for example, where the think tank pundits were given the task of coming up with a plan to topple a secular regime without 1. Triggering a violent insurgency, 2. Igniting a massive anti-war demonstrations around the world, and 3. Producing hundreds or thousands of U.S. casualties. In other words, our esteemed leaders didn't want another Iraq, which is understandable. Anyway, that was the basic assignment. So the think tankers came up with this brilliant plan to enlist Sunni militants that the CIA would fund, arm, train, and deploy into Syria to shoot the place up, raise holy hell, and then topple the regime of Syrian President Bashar Assad. That was the plan, at least. 4.5 years later, the place is a worse mess than Iraq. Half the population is either dead or internally displaced. The civilian infrastructure is in shambles, and nothing has been achieved. Nothing. Assad is safely tucked away in Damascus. The jihadi proxies are on the run, and everyone hates the U.S. more than ever. Great plan, huh? Where's the downside? The downside is that now Washington finds itself backed against the wall with precious few options that don't involve a direct confrontation with Moscow. Of course, all of this could have been avoided had the White House been more eager to negotiate a settlement to the conflict months earlier in Vienna. But instead, the bull-headed Obama team decided to stick with its dreary Assad must go mantra, which put the kibosh on any long-term agreement or ceasefire proposal. So now, the Russian-led coalition has made significant gains on the ground, retaking numerous key cities, highways, and air bases in the west and south, while sending U.S.-backed terrorists fleeing eastward toward Raqqa. These developments have forced Washington into a fallback position that will likely entail air support for Turkish ground forces, who will be deployed to northern Syria to take and hold area sufficient for a safe zone, which is an innocuous-sounding moniker the media invokes to conceal the fact that Turkey plans to annex sovereign Syrian territory, which, by the way, is an act of war. Now fast forward to last week. Some readers may have noticed disturbing headlines like this in the Wall Street Journal: U.S. urges Turkey to seal border. Or this Reuters piece that popped up on Monday: NATO allies act to strengthen Turkey's air defenses. Why, you may ask, does Obama want Turkey to close the border now, when the horse has already left the barn? What I mean is that the White House has known for over 3 years that the bulk of the jihadis were transiting Turkey on their way to Syria, just like they knew that ISIS's oil was being transported across Turkey. They knew it all because they have their damn spy satellites and AWACS circling overhead. In fact, they could probably tell you how many bumblebees crossed the border at any given time, so they sure as heck saw the throngs of bearded roughnecks moving southward in droves. So why is it so urgent to close the border now? After all, the damage is already done, right? Could it have something to do with the fact that Putin's legions are moving north to seal the border? Could there be an alternate objective? For example, could the U.S. and Turkey be setting the stage for an incursion into Syria that would secure the land needed for the glorious safe zone? That's what most of the analysts seem to think, at least the ones that haven't been co-opted by the mainstream media. But why is NATO suddenly getting involved? What's that all about? After all, Putin was reluctant to even commit his air force to the Syrian conflict. It's not like he's planning to invade Turkey or something, right? Of course he's not thinking of invading Turkey. That would pit Russia against NATO in a planet-incinerating fight to the death. That might please some of the crackpots in Washington, but just about everyone else would rather avoid the mushroom cloud scenario. So what's really going on? For that, we turn to Moon of Alabama, that provides this excellent summary in a recent post titled, "The Real Terrorist Sympathizers Want to Wage War on Syria and Russia." Here's an excerpt, quote, "Who initiated this sudden rush within major NATO governments to get parliamentary blank checks for waging a long war on Syria, not only in the UK but also in France and Germany. The German government turned on a dime from no military intervention in Syria ever to let's wage a war of terror on Syria, without any backing from the UN or international law. Who initiated this? A simple medium-sized terror attack in Paris by some Belgians and French cannot be the sole reason for this stampede. Did Obama call and demand support for his plans? What are these? I smell a trap that is being laid, likely via a treacherous Turkey, to somehow threaten Russia with or involve it in a wider war. This would include military attacks in East Ukraine or Crimea, as well as in Syria. Obama demanded European backing in case the issue gets out of hand. No other reason I have found explains the current panic. The terrorists the West supports in Syria are in trouble. The real terrorist sympathizers need to rush to their help. It is a start of all-out war on Syria and its Russian protectors. Terrorist sympathizers want to wage war on Syria and Russia, Moon of Alabama. Is that what's going on? Has Turkish President Erdogan figured out how to hoodwink the NATO allies into a confrontation with Russia that will help him achieve his goal of toppling Assad and stealing Syrian territory? It's hard to say, but clearly something has changed. After all, neither France nor Germany nor the UK were nearly as gung-ho just a few weeks ago. Now they're all hyped up and ready for World War III. Why is that? Ah, Grasshopper, that is the mystery, a mystery that was unraveled in an op-ed that appeared in the Tuesday edition of the Turkish newspaper Hürriyet Daily News. Here's the excerpt. Quote, "The increase in military cooperation with NATO countries against ISIL and the piling up of NATO forces near Turkey's border with Syria take place in parallel with the recent deal between Ankara and the Brussels over Syrian refugees and the reactivation of Turkey's EU accession bid. Western forces pile up on Turkey-Syria border, Hürriyet." Okay, so Erdogan worked out a deal with the other NATO countries. Why is that such a big deal? Well, check out this blurb from today's Zaman. Quote, Erdogan's advisor, Burhan Kuzu, summed it up even more succinctly, saying, quote, the EU finally got Turkey's message and opened its purse strings. Opened its purse strings. What did we say? We'll open our borders and unleash all the Syrian refugees on you, Kuzu stated in his controversial tweet. EU bows to Turkey's threat on refugees, says Erdogan advisor. Today's Zaman. Blackmail. Is that what we're talking about, blackmail? It sure sounds like it. Let's summarize. Erdogan intentionally releases tens of thousands of Syrian refugees into Europe to put pressure on EU politicians, who quickly lose the support of their people and face the meteoric rise of right-wing parties. And then, the next thing you know, Merkel, Hollande, and every other EU leader is looking to cut a deal with Erdogan to keep the refugees in Turkey. Isn't that how it all went down? Except we're missing one important factoid here, because according to the first op-ed, the increase in military cooperation with NATO and the piling up of NATO forces near Turkey's border took place in parallel with the deal between Ankara and the Brussels. Get it? There was a quid pro quo that no one wants to talk about. In other words, Germany, France, and the UK agreed to support Erdogan's loony plan to conduct military operations in Syria, risking a serious dust-up with Russia in order to save their own miserable political careers. Boy, if that doesn't take the cake, then I don't know what does. Holy smoke, Batman. Erdogan has to go. By Finian Cunningham for RT on informationclearinghouse.info. December 4, 2015. Turkish President Recep Erdogan has been shooting from the lip over the past week since the fatal shooting down of a Russian fighter jet. He truculently denied accusations of supporting terrorism, challenging Russia to prove it. Well, holy smoke, Batman. Yes, Batman, not the caped screen hero. Instead, we're talking about the city of the same name, located in Turkey's southeastern region. It is where Turkey's state-owned oil industry is centered. Batman is also where the oil smuggling routes run by the Islamic State terror network are centered, according to surveillance images released this week by the Russian Defense Ministry. Air reconnaissance photos show thousands of trucks running stolen oil from Syrian state-owned fields in the east of the country converging on the Turkish city of Batman, near the Syrian border. The oil smuggling operation has been going for at least 2 years since the so-called Islamic State terror group took over the oil fields in eastern Syria near the city of Deir ez-Zor. The illicit trade is reckoned to have been earning the jihadists up to $3 million a day to help fund their war against the Syrian government of President Assad. The smuggled oil needs a buyer for the enterprise to work. Enter Turkey. This week, before the latest data release from the Russian Ministry of Defense, President Vladimir Putin repeated claims that Turkish authorities were involved in facilitating the terrorist oil trade. Putin told world leaders at the Paris Climate Change Conference that this was a factor in why Turkish warplanes shot down a Russian fighter jet last week, with the loss of the pilot's life and that of another serviceman during a follow-up rescue mission. Erdogan reacted angrily to the claim, dismissing it as, quote, slander. Erdogan testily put the challenge to Russia to present its proof. Quote, the accusation that Turkey allegedly buys crude oil from Islamic State is unacceptable, and to say it is immoral, said Erdogan. You can't just say things, you need to present evidence. If documents exist, let's see them. If the fact is proven, I will not stay in my position. If Erdogan is a man of his word, which is doubtful, then he should start packing his bags, right now. The evidence presented by Russia's military high command shows beyond any doubt that Turkey is central to Islamic State's illegal oil trade and thus the terror group's ability to fund its violence. Russia's Deputy Defense Minister Anatoly Antonov didn't mince words about the revelation. He said, quote, "According to our data, the top political leadership of the country, President Erdogan and his family, is involved in this criminal business." What is particularly incriminating from the Russian data is that the East Syrian oil route operated by IS is destined for the Turkish city of Batman. Batman is the heart of the Turk oil industry. It is where the country's biggest oil field is located and where major refineries are based. From Batman, there is a 500-kilometer pipeline running westwards to the Mediterranean port cities of Dörtyol and Ceyhan, both located in the Gold of Iskenderun. The pipeline, which has a capacity to supply up to 30 million barrels of crude oil a year, is owned and operated by Turkey's state-owned BOTAS Petroleum Corporation. The port of Ceyhan is where the licensed shipping company BMZ, owned by President Erdogan's son, Bilal, and other family members, is based. BMZ is a big Turkish player in the global oil trade. Significantly, Turkish newspaper Today's Zaman reported in September this year that Erdogan's BMZ spent $36 million in acquiring 2 new oil tankers to bring its total fleet to 5. The ships are believed to ferry much of their crude oil cargoes to Japan and other Asian countries. The business is booming, and it's no wonder. Putin had earlier responded to Erdogan's denials of collusion in terrorist oil smuggling by saying that, quote, "It's hard to imagine how the Turkish authorities could not be aware of the industrial-scale transport of oil across its border." But now Russian aerial images have presented a complete picture of how this massive oil supply is being routed through Turkey with state-owned companies. The personal complicity of Erdogan through his family shipping business makes his resignation unquestionable. Furthermore, the Turkish president should face prosecution for gross violations of international law amounting to war crimes. Surely the Americans must know about the industrial-scale oil smuggling routes. For more than a year, since the U.S. began bombing raids on Syria, allegedly against the Islamic State terror network, the oil smuggling has been untouched. This week, General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, told a congressional committee that it was only in the last 2 months that the Pentagon got serious with airstrikes on IS oil routes. He admitted that for more than a year, the Pentagon hadn't bothered because it wasn't communicating sufficiently with the State Department. Dunford and the U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, who was also giving evidence to the same committee, both claimed that the decision not to strike oil trucks run by terrorists was taken in order to quote, avoid civilian casualties. That explanation does not stack up. The fact is, as Russia's Defense Ministry spokesman Lieutenant General Sergei Rudskoy said, the U.S. has done little to nothing to halt the terror oil trade out of Syria. Russia, by contrast, has destroyed dozens of oil processing facilities and over 1,000 trucks since it began its military intervention less than 2 months ago. Wholesale damage that has cut terror smuggling revenues by 50%, according to the Russian military. now that Russia has presented a damning picture of how Islamic State and other jihadist terror groups have been financing their terror campaign in Syria, a ball of questions is in the U.S. court. Turkey is a member of the U.S.-led NATO military alliance, the organization supposedly responsible for maintaining security and defense in Europe. Turkey must surely be kicked out of NATO for its role in sponsoring terrorism. How can France, in particular, remain in the same military alliance with a country that is financing terror groups that were involved in a mass killing on the streets of Paris only 3 weeks ago? But Washington and its allies have much more to answer for. Oil convoys heading north into Turkey is just one half of a giant racket, with the other half involving convoys of weapons and jihadist fighters heading south into Syria. U.S. and British military intelligence are implicated in this terror transmission, according to American journalist Seymour Hersh. The weapons supply from Turkey to terror groups in Syria with the collusion of Turkish state intelligence is coming to light with the arrest last week of Turkish journalists who have dared to uncover the state-sponsored oil for weapons racket. Russia's latest evidence presents a stark choice. The world can now see who is fueling conflict and terrorism in Syria and beyond. Turkey is a state sponsor of terrorism, and other NATO members are also implicated. If legal sanctions do not follow, then we will know, chillingly, that the world has descended into gangsterism and barbarism.